The great station spun slowly around the dead star called Kepler 438. It was bigger than most moons, made of metal and crystal that sparkled in the harsh light. Inside the station, 12 different alien races sat in a huge circular room. They called themselves the Galactic Senate, and they had ruled this part of space for thousands of years. Senator Vex Thule stood up from his crystal chair. His body looked like living glass, and light moved through him when he spoke. The other senators turned their various eyes, stalks, and sensors toward him. Some had fur, some had scales, and some were just floating clouds of gas held together by force fields. "We are here to discuss the human problem," Vex Thule said. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "These mammals have become too bold." The human problem. That's what they called it when a young race got too big for its boots. It happened sometimes. A species would discover faster than light travel and think they owned the galaxy. The Senate had dealt with hundreds of such cases over the millennia. Senator Korthax, who looked like a giant insect made of black metal, clicked his mandibles. "The humans have spread to 17 star systems in just 200 years. They ignore our trade laws. Their ships enter restricted zones without permission. They act like they belong here. Worse," added Senator Ythara, a creature that looked like a jellyfish swimming in air. "Their diplomats are rude. They don't bow. They don't show proper respect. They actually argue with us during negotiations." This caused angry noises from around the room, chittering, buzzing, and sounds no human throat could make. The Senate had rules. Everyone knew the rules. Young races stayed quiet, learned their place, and waited to be invited into galactic society. It had worked this way for so long that most Senate races had forgotten what it was like to be challenged. "How many ships do they have?" asked Senator Morthek, whose body was made of living shadows. "Our scouts report approximately 3,000 vessels," Korthax replied. "Most are cargo ships. Their largest warships are barely the size of our patrol boats. They use chemical rockets and metal projectiles. Very primitive." Laughter filled the chamber. Chemical rockets! The Senate had moved beyond such crude technology when some of their races were still learning to use fire. Their ships used exotic matter engines and weapons that could tear holes in space itself. "What about their population?" Ythara asked. 8 billion on their home world, about 2 billion spread across their colonies. Vex Thule answered. "They breed like insects. But that just means more of them to bring under control." Senator Kukesnor, who existed as pure energy in a containment suit, spoke up. "Perhaps we should try diplomacy first. Some young races can be reasoned with." This caused even more laughter. Kexnor was known for being soft. Most Senate races had learned that young species only understood force. You had to show them their place in the universe, or they would keep causing trouble. "We have tried diplomacy," Vex Thule said. "We sent them our standard compliance package 6 months ago. They were supposed to limit their expansion and accept Senate oversight. Instead, they sent back a message saying they would take our suggestions under consideration." Can you believe such arrogance? There. The chamber buzzed with outrage. Take suggestions under consideration? From the beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia? It was like a child telling their parents that bedtime was just a suggestion. "I move for immediate military action," Vex Thule continued. "We send the first pacification fleet to their border colonies. We give them one final chance to surrender. If they refuse, we demonstrate Senate power." "Seconded," said Korthax immediately. "Thirded," added Ythara. The vote was quick and unanimous. Even Kexnor voted yes, though he seemed reluctant. The humans would be put in their place, just like every other upstart species before them. What none of them knew was that Admiral Sarah Chen was listening to every word. She sat in a small, dark ship, hidden behind one of the system's asteroids. The ship was painted black and covered in sensors that made it invisible to Senate technology. Chen had been watching the Senate for 3 years, learning their languages, studying their habits. "Did you get all that?" Chen asked her communications officer. "Every word, Admiral. Full recording. All frequencies." Chen smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just watched her prey walk into a trap. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them the Senate just declared war on humanity. Tell them it's time for Protocol Omega." The message traveled faster than light across human space. In hidden bunkers on Earth, flags that had not flown for decades were raised. On colony worlds that looked like peaceful farms, massive doors opened in the ground to reveal weapons that could crack moons. In space, cargo ships that had been hauling grain and ore for years quietly activated their true purpose. The Senate had looked at humanity and seen primitives with chemical rockets and metal weapons. They saw a young race that needed to be taught its place. What they didn't see was that humans had been preparing for this day since they first learned they were not alone in the universe. The Senate had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to face a real enemy. They were about to learn why humans had spent 2 centuries appearing weak while growing strong. They were about to discover that some sleeping giants should never be awakened. In the Great Chamber, the senators were already celebrating their victory over an enemy they had defeated only in their imaginations. They had no idea that their unanimous vote had just sealed their own extinction. The message from Earth arrived at the Senate station exactly 36 hours after the declaration of war. It was delivered by a small human diplomatic ship that looked like it had seen better days. The hull was patched with different metals, and one of its engines was clearly running rough. Ambassador James Martinez stepped off the ship looking nervous and sweaty. His hands shook as he carried a data pad with humanity's official response. The Senate guards, tall creatures covered in blue scales, watched him with amusement. This was exactly what they expected from a primitive species facing the might of galactic civilization. "Honorable Senators," Martinez began, his voice cracking slightly. "The United Earth government has received your ultimatum. We would like to negotiate terms." Senator Vexus Thul's crystalline body flickered with what humans would recognize as laughter. "There are no terms to negotiate, human. You have 28 days remaining to withdraw from all colonies beyond your home system. You will submit to Senate oversight. These are facts, not requests." Martinez swallowed hard and looked at his datapad. "Perhaps we could discuss a partial withdrawal? We have families on some of these worlds, children who were born there. Surely you understand. Your breeding habits are not our concern," Korthax clicked. "You expanded without permission. Now you will contract with our guidance." The human ambassador spent 3 hours pleading, offering compromises, begging for more time. To the Senate, it was pathetic, but expected. Young races always tried to negotiate when faced with superior power. In the end, Martinez left with nothing but a promise that the Senate would consider giving humanity an extra week to comply. What the Senate didn't know was that every second of the meeting was being broadcast live to Earth and all human colonies. They didn't know that Martinez's nervous sweating was an act, or that his shaking hands were caused by excitement, not fear. They certainly didn't know that the broken engine on his ship was actually an advanced scanning system that had just mapped every weapon and defense on their great station. Back on Earth, President Elena Rodriguez watched the broadcast in the deep bunker beneath Colorado. Around her sat the leaders of the Human Colonial Defense Force, the heads of every major corporation, and scientists who had been working in secret for decades. "Gentlemen, ladies," Rodriguez said, "they bought it completely. They think we're primitives begging for mercy." Admiral Chen's voice came through the secure communication link from her hidden ship. "All Senate fleets are maintaining normal patrol patterns. They're not even raising their alert status. They think this will be over before it starts." Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of Human Strategic Research, stood up from her chair. She was a small woman with gray hair, but her eyes held the intensity of someone who had been preparing for war her entire life. It's time to show them what we've really been doing for the last 2 centuries. Across human space, the Great Deception began to unravel. On the colony world of New Texas, farmers put down their plows and walked to barns that held more than grain. Inside were sleek fighters that looked nothing like the crude human ships the Senate had observed. These craft used technology that combined the best of human engineering with improvements on every piece of alien tech they had ever encountered. The mining ships that had been hauling ore between human worlds for decades revealed their true purpose. Their cargo holds opened to show racks of kinetic weapons that could punch through any armor known to galactic science. Their simple chemical rockets were just the first stage of propulsion systems that could push massive projectiles to incredible speeds. On Europa, the moon of Jupiter, the ice cracked open in perfectly straight lines. What emerged were not the research stations the Senate thought were there, but massive shipyards that had been building humanity's secret fleet. Ships that had never appeared on any Senate scan because they had never left their underground berths. The orbital platforms around every human world began to change. Solar panels folded back to reveal weapon batteries. Communication arrays rotated to show they were actually targeting systems. Even the space stations that handled civilian traffic were armed with systems that could level cities. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the cargo hauler, New Dawn, currently traveling between Mars and the Alpha Centauri colonies. To any Senate observer, she was just another merchant captain moving goods around human space. They couldn't see that her cargo hold was full of self-guided missiles, or that her crew were all former military personnel. "Captain," her weapons officer said, "we're receiving activation codes from Earth Command." Santos nodded. She had been waiting for this day since she was recruited into the program 15 years ago. "Send the signal to all sleeper ships in this sector. Tell them it's time to stop pretending." Across human space, similar scenes played out. Ships that had been carrying wheat suddenly sprouted weapon systems. Mining platforms revealed themselves as forward bases. Even the diplomatic vessels that had been visiting Senate worlds for years began transmitting detailed intelligence reports they had been gathering. The Senate's intelligence analysts continued to file reports about humanity's desperate preparations. They noted that humans were moving supplies and reinforcing their colonies, but they interpreted this as the panicked actions of a species that knew it was about to lose. They saw what they expected to see. Primitives, trying to build defenses that couldn't possibly stop Senate technology. What they missed was the real preparation happening in the shadows. Human computer specialists had been infiltrating Senate networks for decades, learning about their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. Human biologists had been studying Senate species, understanding how they thought, how they fought, what would hurt them most. Most importantly, human psychologists had been studying Senate behavior. They knew that the alien alliance had grown arrogant from millennia of easy victories. They knew the Senate would underestimate any opponent that didn't look immediately threatening. They knew that by appearing weak, humanity could gain the element of surprise. In the deepest bunkers on Earth, weapons were being loaded that the Senate had never imagined. Not because the technology was beyond them, but because they had never thought anyone would be cruel enough to build such things. Humans had not forgotten their history of warfare. While other species had grown civilized and soft, humanity had simply hidden its teeth. The Senate's deadline ticked down. 26 days, 25, 24. Each day brought more human diplomatic attempts, more begging for mercy, more apparent signs of a species preparing for inevitable defeat. The Senate relaxed, confident that when the time came, it would be a simple matter of demonstrating their superiority to another backwards race. They had no idea that humanity was not preparing to lose. They were preparing for the Senate to learn what it meant to pick a fight with apex predators who had been pretending to be prey. The deadline came and went like a whisper in space. 24 hours after humanity's time ran out, the Senate's first pacification fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. 50 ships, each one larger than anything in the human fleet, their hulls gleaming with the advanced alloys that had protected Senate vessels for thousands of years. Captain Zixtar stood on the bridge of the fleet flagship, a massive dreadnought called Inevitable Justice. His 4 arms moved across control panels with practiced ease, while his compound eyes tracked multiple displays. This was going to be simple. The humans had ignored the Senate's generous offer to surrender peacefully. Now they would learn what resistance cost. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "we're detecting the human colony on the 3rd planet. Population reads as approximately 2 million. No significant orbital defenses visible." "No defensive fleet?" Zixtar asked. "Negative, sir. We're picking up some civilian traffic, a few cargo ships, but nothing that registers as military." "Wait." The officer paused, manipulating his controls. "I'm getting strange readings from some of the orbital platforms. The energy signatures don't match our database." Zixtar's mandibles clicked in what his species used as laughter. Humans trying to retrofit civilian structures into weapons. How primitive. "Communications. Broadcast the standard surrender demand." The message went out across all frequencies. "Human colony of Kepler 442b. You are in violation of Senate law. Surrender immediately and prepare for evacuation to your home system. You have 1 standard hour to comply." The response came back in clear, unaccented Galactic Standard. "Senate Fleet. This is Colonel Sarah Martinez, commanding New Harmony Colony Defense Force. We respectfully decline your offer." "Colonel?" Zixtar was puzzled. Humans weren't supposed to have military ranks in their colonies. Intelligence had reported that these were farming settlements with minimal security forces. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, "I'm detecting movement from those orbital platforms. They're rotating toward us. Range to target? 15 million kilometers and closing." Zixtar relaxed. At this range, even the most advanced weapons would take time to reach them, and their shields could handle anything the humans might throw. "Begin standard bombardment pattern. Target their orbital installations first, then any surface military structures." The first indication that something was wrong came when the human platforms didn't fire energy weapons. Instead, they launched what looked like simple metal rods, long, thin projectiles that appeared to be moving much slower than expected. "Sir, those projectiles are accelerating," the sensor officer called out, his voice rising with confusion. "Impossible. They're just metal rods. How can they?" The answer came when the first tungsten spear, now moving at 30% of light speed, struck the Senate fleet's lead cruiser. The ship's energy shields, designed to deflect plasma bolts and particle beams, offered no resistance to simple, dense matter moving at relativistic velocity. The rod punched through the shield as if it weren't there, then through the hull, then out the other side. The cruiser simply came apart. One moment it was a proud Senate warship. The next it was expanding debris and glowing gas. "What just happened?" Zixtar demanded. His weapons officer was frantically working his controls. "Sir, those aren't primitive projectiles. They're kinetic penetrators accelerated by some kind of magnetic system we've never seen before. The impact velocity is enormous. More metal spears were already on their way." The human orbital platforms, which had appeared to be simple mining and manufacturing stations, revealed themselves as massive kinetic weapons systems. Each one could fire dozens of tungsten rods, accelerating them through electromagnetic rails that ran the entire length of the station. "Evasive maneuvers," Zixtar ordered, but his ships were not built for quick turns. They were designed for the kind of warfare the Senate had practiced for millennia. Long-range energy duels, where shields and armor decided victory. Another cruiser died as 3 rods struck it simultaneously. Then a destroyer simply vanished in a cloud of plasma when a single spear punched through its reactor core. "Return fire!" Zixtar screamed. The Senate fleet's plasma cannon spoke, sending brilliant bolts of superheated gas toward the human platforms. The beams struck, Nothing. Where the platforms had been moments before, space was empty. Sir, the platforms are moving. They're using some kind of thruster system we didn't detect. They're repositioning behind the planet's moon. That's impossible. Those structures are too large to move that quickly. But they were moving. And worse, more targets were appearing. Ships that had looked like simple cargo haulers began shedding their outer hulls like snakes shedding skin. Underneath were sleek predators, armed with the same kinetic weapons as the orbital platforms. The human fleet wasn't large, but it fought like nothing the Senate had ever encountered. Instead of forming neat battle lines and trading fire at long range, they scattered and attacked from every direction at once. They used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around at impossible angles. They hid behind asteroids and struck without warning. Worse, they seemed to know exactly where to hit. Sensor arrays went dark with the first volley. Communication hubs were targeted and destroyed. Command bridges exploded as tungsten rods found them with surgical precision. Sir, they're targeting our command and control systems specifically, the tactical officer reported. It's like they know exactly how our ships are built. They did know. 20 years of diplomatic visits, of human engineers touring Senate vessels, of trade missions that asked innocent questions about ship design. All of it had been intelligence gathering. And now humanity was using that knowledge to dissect the Senate fleet with deadly efficiency. Captain Zixtar found himself commanding a fleet that was falling apart around him. His ships couldn't hit targets that moved like human vessels did. Their weapons couldn't penetrate human armor that shouldn't have existed. Their shields were useless against weapons that shouldn't have worked. Sir, we've lost 8 ships. None? Several of their ships show damage, but none have been destroyed. Their armor is absorbing our plasma fire somehow. The human armor was simple in concept, but revolutionary in practice. Instead of energy shields that could be overloaded, they used layers of ultra-dense materials that simply absorbed and dispersed energy. Instead of trying to stop kinetic weapons, they redirected them. It was engineering that focused on surviving damage rather than preventing it. Sir, incoming transmission from the human commander. Colonel Martinez's voice came through clear and calm. Senate Captain, you have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing from this system. This is your only warning. You dare threaten us? Zixtar snarled. We are the Senate. We have ruled this galaxy for... His words were cut off as his flagship shuddered. Something had struck the ship, but the lights didn't dim, the gravity didn't fail. Instead, a new voice came over the communication system. Captain, this is Chief Petty Officer Jackson of the Human Boarding Party. Your ship is now under our control. Please order your remaining vessels to surrender. Impossible. No one could board a Senate ship in the middle of battle. But somehow, humans had done exactly that. Small, fast ships had attached to his hull like parasites, and combat troops had cut their way inside. Around him, his bridge crew was surrendering to humans in powered armor who had appeared from nowhere. The weapons they carried weren't the crude chemical projectile weapons Senate intelligence had reported. These were advanced energy rifles that seemed to be based on Senate technology, but improved in ways that made them deadlier. How? Zixtar asked, as a human soldier removed his sidearm. Colonel Martinez materialized on his bridge through a transport system that shouldn't have existed. Captain, you've been fighting humans who had 200 years to study your technology, your tactics, and your weaknesses. You came here expecting to face primitives. Instead, you found predators who had been pretending to be prey. The remaining Senate ships were already retreating, those that still could. Of the 50 vessels that had arrived with such confidence, only 23 were still operational. Not one human ship had been destroyed. As the Senate fleet limped away from Kepler 442b, emergency signals flashed across their communication networks. This had not been a battle. It had been a lesson. The humans had not just defeated a Senate fleet. They had made it look easy. In the great chamber orbiting Kepler 438, the senators who had voted for war so confidently now sat in stunned silence as battle reports flooded in. The impossible had happened. A primitive species had not only resisted Senate power, but had humiliated it. For the first time in millennia, the Senate faced an enemy that was not afraid of them. Worse, it was an enemy that had been studying them, preparing for them, and waiting for them to make exactly the mistake they had just made. The war they thought would last days was just beginning, and humanity had drawn first blood. The emergency session of the Galactic Senate convened in chaos. For 3 months since the disaster at Kepler 442b, the reports had only gotten worse. What began as an isolated defeat had become a pattern of human victories that defied every assumption the Senate had made. Senator Vex Thull's crystalline form flickered with agitation as he addressed the chamber. The Third Pacification Fleet has also been defeated. The humans didn't just resist their attack on the mining world of Kepler 186f. They destroyed 14 ships and captured the rest. How is that possible? Demanded Senator Yathara. We sent our best commanders, our most advanced vessels. The humans shouldn't even know how to fight a proper space battle. The answer came from Senator Kethmori, whose gas form swirled with dark colors that indicated deep concern. I've been analyzing the intercepted human communications. We've been wrong about everything. They haven't just been building ships for 2 centuries. They've been building an entire war machine. On the great display screen, intelligence reports scrolled past, showing the true scope of human preparation. The agricultural colonies weren't just farms. They were industrial complexes designed to look like farms. The civilian cargo ships weren't just hauling grain and ore. They were moving weapons, troops, and military supplies, disguised as trade goods. Look at these numbers, Kethmori continued. Human birth rates aren't random. They've been strategically planning their population growth. Every colony was designed to support not just civilians, but military production and trained reserves. Senator QX Nor, the energy being who had argued for diplomacy, spoke up from his containment suit. How could our intelligence have been so wrong? Because they wanted us to be wrong, answered Senator Korthax, clicking his mandibles in distress. Every piece of information we gathered about humanity came from sources they controlled. Every tour of their facilities, every trade negotiation, every diplomatic meeting was designed to make us underestimate them. The truth was becoming clear through captured documents and interrogated prisoners. When humans had first achieved faster-than-light travel, they had encountered evidence of the Senate's existence within months. Ancient ruins on distant worlds, abandoned technology, traces of civilizations that had been pacified by galactic authority. Instead of announcing themselves immediately, humanity had spent decades conducting secret reconnaissance. They learned about Senate power, Senate tactics, and Senate arrogance. Then they began the greatest deception in galactic history. Every human diplomat had been a spy. Every trade mission had been intelligence gathering. Every primitive human technology had been carefully designed to appear less capable than it actually was. While the Senate saw crude chemical rockets, humans were testing advanced propulsion systems in secret facilities. Sir, a Senate intelligence officer reported to the assembled leaders, we're receiving new data from our remaining deep space monitors. Human fleets have been detected in sectors we believed were uninhabited. They're not just expanding their colonies. They're claiming entire star systems. The tactical display showed the horrifying truth. Red dots, marking human presence, were spreading across the galaxy like an infection. Systems the Senate had ignored because they contained no valuable resources were being colonized by humans who seemed to have different ideas about what was valuable. They're taking systems with high radiation stars, the intelligence officer continued. Worlds with toxic atmospheres. Even systems near black holes. We dismissed these as worthless, but they're using them as forward bases. Admiral Thexara of the Senate Navy, a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many eyes, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. It's worse than bases. Our scouts report massive construction projects in these systems. Shipyards, weapons platforms, what appear to be fortress worlds. How long have they been building these? The answer came from a captured human officer who had been brought before the Senate under heavy guard. Commander Lisa Park, formerly of the human vessel Determined Resistance, stood in chains but showed no fear as she faced the assembled alien leaders. "You want to know how long we've been preparing?" Park said. "Since the day we found the ruins of the Keth Nari civilization on Proxima Centauri b. Since we learned what the Senate does to races that don't know their place. We've been preparing for this war for 173 years. The chamber fell silent. The Keth Nari had been pacified 8 centuries ago. Their entire species reduced to a single, protected world under Senate oversight. The ruins humans had found weren't ancient history. They were a warning. "You studied our victims," Senator Vexthal said, his voice crackling with rage. "We studied your pattern," Park replied calmly. "First contact, trade agreements, growing control, then ultimatums and pacification when the young race gets too independent. We decided to break that pattern." She looked around the chamber with the confidence of someone who knew her side was winning. "You think this is about the colonies you told us to abandon? It's not. This is about making sure you never threaten another species again." Eris. The implications hit the Senate like a physical blow. This wasn't a territorial dispute or a simple rebellion. Humanity wasn't fighting to keep their colonies. They were fighting to end the Senate itself. "How many ships do they really have?" Admiral Thexara demanded. Commander Park smiled. "More than you thought. Fewer than you fear. But that's not the question you should be asking. What question should we ask? How many can we build per day?" The answer to that question was arriving through intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Human industrial capacity wasn't just larger than the Senate had believed. It was structured completely differently. Where Senate races built ships in specialized facilities over months or years, humans had created modular construction systems that could assemble vessels in weeks. More disturbing were reports of human merchant vessels that were actually construction ships. They would arrive in a system, land on an asteroid or barren moon, and within days have established a basic manufacturing facility. Within weeks, they were producing ammunition, spare parts, and even small combat vessels. "They're fighting a different kind of war," Keth Mori observed. "We build a fleet, then fight with it until it's destroyed or victorious. They build fleets while they fight. Every engagement makes them stronger, not weaker." The psychological warfare was equally effective. Human ships would appear in Senate systems, disable communication relays, and broadcast messages before disappearing. The messages were always the same. The Senate declared war on humanity. We accepted. Senate worlds that had never seen combat in living memory now lived in fear of human raids. Worse, the humans seemed to understand each Senate species better than they understood themselves. Raids on crystalline hegemony worlds targeted their meditation centers, knowing this would cause maximum psychological damage. Attacks on the metallic collective focused on disrupting their hive mind communication networks. "They're not just fighting our military," reported Senator Zorthul, whose species resembled giant spiders made of silver. "They're attacking our identity as civilized beings. They know exactly what will hurt us most." The most disturbing reports came from the Outer Rim territories. Entire Senate colonies were going silent, but not through destruction. When rescue fleets arrived, they found the worlds intact, but empty. The populations had simply vanished. "Where are they taking our people?" demanded Yathara. Commander Park, who had been listening to the Senate's growing panic with obvious satisfaction, spoke up. "We're not taking them anywhere. We're just making sure they can't help your war effort. Prison camps on worlds you'll never find." They're being treated well, but they won't be going home until this is over. This is a violation of all civilized warfare. You wrote the rules of civilized warfare to protect yourselves, Park replied. We never agreed to follow them. You declared war on humanity, Senator. Did you think we would fight fair? End quote. As the session continued, the scope of human preparation became clear. They had reverse-engineered every piece of Senate technology they could get their hands on, then improved it. They had studied every Senate species, learning their biology, psychology, and weaknesses. They had built not just weapons, but an entire civilization designed for total war. Most disturbing of all, they had done it while appearing to be exactly what the Senate expected: young, crude, and harmless. It was deception on a scale that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. The Senate had wanted to teach humanity its place in the galactic order. Instead, they had awakened something that had been hiding in plain sight for 2 centuries. Something that had been studying them, preparing for them, and waiting for them to make the exact mistake they had made. The war was far from over. But already the Senate was learning a terrible truth. Sometimes the prey turns out to be the predator. And sometimes, the predator has been planning this hunt much longer than anyone realized. The decision was made in desperation and rage. After 18 months of defeats, retreats, and the slow realization that they were losing a war they had expected to win in days, the Galactic Senate gathered for what many suspected would be their final vote. Senator Vex's Thul stood before the Great Assembly, his crystalline form dim with exhaustion. Half the seats in the chamber were empty now. Some Senate species had withdrawn from the conflict, trying to negotiate separate peace agreements with humanity. Others had simply fled to the far edges of the galaxy, hoping distance would protect them from human retaliation. We have one option remaining, Vex Thul announced: the cleansing protocol. The chamber fell silent. Even mentioning the cleansing protocol was forbidden under Senate law. It was a weapon system left over from the ancient wars that had established Senate dominance, designed for the complete sterilization of entire star systems. Using it would violate every treaty the Senate had signed, every principle of civilized warfare they claimed to uphold. You can't be serious, Senator Kex Nor said, his energy form flickering with horror. The cleansing protocol is banned for a reason. It doesn't just destroy military targets. It kills everything in a system. The humans have left us no choice. Admiral Thexara replied, his tree-like form swaying with agitation. Conventional warfare has failed. They adapt to every tactic we use. They turn our own strategies against us. We cannot defeat them with honor, so we must defeat them with finality. The plan was simple in its brutality. 3 cleansing devices would be deployed to the Sol system. One aimed at Earth itself, one at Mars, where human military command was located, and one at Jupiter, where their main shipyards operated. The weapons would crack the planet's cores, causing them to collapse into small suns that would sterilize everything within the system. It will take time to prepare the devices, admitted Senator Korthax. They haven't been activated in over 2,000 years, but once deployed, there will be no defense against them. Not even human technology can prevent planetary core collapse. And when the humans see their homeworld destroyed, they will surrender. Vex Thul concluded. No species can continue fighting after losing their birth planet, and 8 billion of their population. The vote was closer than expected, but it passed. 12 Senate races agreed to commit genocide rather than face continued defeat at human hands. They told themselves it was necessary, that humanity had forced them to this extreme. They ignored the fact that they were planning to do exactly what they had accused humanity of being too primitive to deserve existence for. The preparation took 6 months. Ancient weapons systems were awakened and tested on uninhabited worlds. The results were exactly as horrific as expected. Entire planets reduced to glowing debris in a matter of hours. When the Senate fleet carrying the cleansing devices entered the Sol system, they carried with them the power to end human civilization forever. What they found was Earth's moon cracking apart. The first cleansing device had worked perfectly, but the Senate had made a crucial error. In their desperation to strike at humanity's heart, they had targeted Earth's moon first, intending to use it as a demonstration of their power before demanding surrender. They wanted humanity to watch their moon die and understand that Earth was next. Instead, they had just killed 2 billion humans. The lunar colonies that humanity had built over 2 centuries were not just mining operations and research stations. They were home to families, to children, to elders who had been born when humans first reached the stars. The moon's destruction rained debris down on Earth for days, causing earthquakes and tsunamis that killed another billion people on the planet below. Admiral Sarah Chen received the reports from her flagship in the outer solar system. Her face showed no expression as she read the casualty figures, but her hands gripped the command chair arms hard enough to bend metal. "Admiral," her communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving surrender demands from the Senate fleet. They want us to broadcast our capitulation across all human space." Chen looked up at the main screen, where the Senate fleet hung in space like a collection of alien tombstones. 50 ships, the largest force they had been able to assemble for what they clearly intended as their final victory. Behind them, Earth's moon was still falling apart. Pieces of humanity's first off-world colonies burning up in the home planet's atmosphere. "Communications," Chen said, her voice calm and cold. "Broadcast this message on all frequencies." The transmission went out across the solar system, across human space, and beyond to every corner of the galaxy, where anyone might be listening. Admiral Chen looked directly into the camera, and when she spoke, there was something in her voice that made even her own crew step back. "People of the galaxy, you have just witnessed the Galactic Senate commit genocide against the human species. They have murdered 2 billion civilians, including children, in violation of every law of warfare they claim to uphold. This act has revealed the Senate for what it truly is. Not a force for galactic civilization, but a collection of tyrants who will slaughter innocents rather than accept defeat." She paused, and when she continued, her words carried across space like a death sentence. "The Senate wanted to see what humans are capable of when pushed too far. They are about to learn why we spent 2 centuries appearing harmless while we prepared for this day. They wanted war with humanity. They have it. What happened next would be studied by xenobiologists for centuries, if there had been any left to study it. Humanity revealed the final secret they had been hiding. They had never stopped being apex predators. The bioweapons deployed against Senate species were not crude viruses or bacteria. They were precisely engineered organisms, designed specifically for each alien race's biology. The crystalline hegemony's energy-based life forms found themselves infected with constructs that disrupted their quantum coherence. The metallic collective's hive mind networks were invaded by digital parasites that turned their own communication systems against them. Most horrible of all, the weapons were designed not for quick death, but for the complete extinction of each species. They targeted reproductive systems, ensuring that even survivors could not continue their race. They were weapons of genocide, created by a species that had decided genocide was what their enemies deserved. The Senate fleet in the Sol system tried to retreat, but found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had appeared as if from nowhere. They tried to fight, but their weapons seemed to have no effect on human ships whose armor had been specifically designed to resist Senate technology. One by one, the Senate vessels were boarded by humans in powered armor who moved through the corridors like death itself. The alien crews found themselves facing soldiers who fought not just with advanced weapons, but with the cold fury of a species whose children had been murdered. Captain Zixtar, who had survived the first battle at Kepler 442b, only to find himself captured again, was brought before Admiral Chen on her flagship. He expected threats, demands for information, perhaps torture. Instead, he found something much worse. A human who looked at him like he was already dead. "Captain," Chen said, "your species voted to exterminate mine. We've decided to return the favor." "You can't," Zixtar said, his mandibles clicking with desperation. We are a civilized race. We have art, culture, billions of innocent civilians who had nothing to do with this war. So did the humans on Luna, Chen replied. They had schools and parks and children learning to walk in low gravity. Your Senate decided they needed to die to make a point. We've decided your entire species needs to die to make ours. Across the galaxy, Senate worlds began going silent. Not destroyed in nuclear fire or orbital bombardment, but simply empty. The engineered plagues worked quickly and completely, targeting not just the intelligent species but the entire ecosystem that supported them. Worlds that had been inhabited for millennia became sterile rocks floating in space. The few Senate survivors who escaped to the outer rim sent desperate messages throughout the galaxy, warning any species that would listen. They spoke of humans who fought like demons, who showed no mercy, who had turned warfare into an art form of complete extinction. But the warnings came too late. In the end, only scattered groups of Senate species survived, hiding in the dark spaces between stars. Telling horror stories of the day their government decided to test humanity's patience. The war had lasted 3 years. The Senate, which had ruled the galaxy for millennia, ceased to exist. Their worlds lay empty. Their fleets were scrap metal. Their civilizations were extinct. They had wanted to put humanity in its place. Humanity's place, as it turned out, was wherever they decided it should be. In the ruins of the Senate's great station, now drifting dead and cold around the neutron star Kepler 438, a single message played on repeat. It was Admiral Chen's voice, broadcasting to any ship that might pass by. They called us primitive. They declared us inferior. They chose extinction over coexistence. Let this be a lesson to the galaxy. There are worse fates than being conquered by humans. The worst fate is making us angry enough to decide you shouldn't exist at all.